The mustang's eyes rolled white with terror as Katherine Sullivan stepped into the corral, her boots crunching on the dried earth of La Veta, Colorado territory, in the scorching summer of 1878. She did not flinch when the horse reared, hooves pawing the air, nostrils flaring wide enough to show the red flesh inside. Instead, she began to sing. Her voice carried soft and low across the dusty enclosure, a melody her mother had sung to her when she was small, before the fever took her during that brutal winter in Kansas. The words were half English, half something older that her grandmother had taught them, a lullaby that seemed to come from the earth itself. The mustang's ears swiveled forward, caught by the sound, and slowly, so slowly, his front hooves returned to the ground. Katherine did not approach. She simply stood there in her worn calico dress, her dark blonde hair escaping from its bun in the heat, and sang. The melody wove through the afternoon air, rising and falling like the mountains that surrounded the small town. The horse took one cautious step toward her, then another, his breathing evening out as her voice continued its gentle journey through the ancient tune. She did not notice the man watching from outside the corral fence until the song ended, and the mustang stood close enough for her to touch his muzzle. Only when the horse's soft nose pressed into her palm did she hear the slow, deliberate clapping. "That is the most extraordinary thing I have ever witnessed," the man said, his voice carrying a roughness that spoke of hard work and long days in the sun. Katherine turned, her cheeks flushing as she realized she had been observed. The man stood with one boot propped on the lowest fence rail, his hat pushed back to reveal a strong, weathered face. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, perhaps 26 or 27, with eyes the color of a Colorado sky just after dawn. Dust covered his denim pants and cotton shirt, and a bandana hung loose around his neck. "I did not know anyone was watching," Katherine said, stepping away from the mustang, who followed her a few paces before stopping. "Harrison Brennan," the man said, touching the brim of his hat. "I work the cattle ranch north of town. Came in to see about buying a horse, but I think you might have just gentled the one I had my eye on." "Katherine Sullivan," she replied, smoothing her dress unnecessarily. "I help my father at the livery. This one came in 3 days ago, wild as they come. Nobody could get near him, until you sang to him." Harrison's expression held something between admiration and wonder. "Where did you learn that, my mother? She had a way with animals, too. Said music was the language they understood best, better than any breaking or training." Katherine glanced back at the mustang, who stood watching her with dark, intelligent eyes. "Fear makes them dangerous. Take away the fear, and they remember they do not want to hurt anyone." Harrison climbed over the fence with easy grace, landing in the corral with a soft thud. The mustang tensed immediately, and Katherine felt the animal's anxiety ripple through the air. "May I?" Harrison asked, stopping several feet away. "Or would you sing again? You want me to sing for you?" Katherine's voice held surprise. "For the horse," Harrison clarified, though something in his eyes suggested he would not mind hearing her voice again either. "I would like to see if he will let me approach." Katherine began another song, this one a simple folk melody about rivers and homecoming. As her voice filled the space between them, the mustang's ears pricked forward again. Harrison moved slowly, his steps measured and calm, until he stood beside Katherine. Together they faced the horse, and together they watched as the animal decided to trust. "You have a rare gift," Harrison said quietly, not wanting to speak over her singing. When the song ended and the mustang allowed him to touch its neck, he looked at Katherine with an expression that made her heart skip. "I have worked with horses my whole life, and I have never seen anything like this." "It is not magic," Katherine said, though she felt the warmth of his praise. Just patience and the right tune. My ranch, Harrison began, then stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. We have been having trouble with a group of new horses we brought in from Wyoming. Wild ones, caught from the plains. 3 men have been kicked trying to break them the traditional way, and my foreman says we should just sell them off before someone gets killed. But if you could do what you just did here with them. You want to hire me? Catherine's eyebrows rose. No one had ever offered her work before, not real work. She helped her father, yes, but that was family obligation, not employment. I want to hire your gift, Harrison said. I will pay you fair wages, same as I pay my ranch hands. $2 a day, and you would only work until the horses are gentled enough for proper training. Could be 2 weeks, could be a month, but I think you could do it if you were willing. $2 a day was more money than Katherine had ever had of her own. Her father ran the livery, but the profits went to keeping the business running and feeding their small family. Her younger sister Mary needed new shoes, and winter would come soon enough. The thought of contributing real money to the household made her straighten her shoulders. I would need to ask my father, she said, and I could only work during the day. I have responsibilities here at the livery. Of course, Harrison agreed immediately. I would bring you out in the morning and have you back by evening. You would never be alone with the men if that concerns you. My mother lives at the ranch house. She could chaperone, and you would be treated with complete respect. Katherine studied Harrison's face, searching for any hint of impropriety or false promises. She had lived in Lavetta for 3 years, since her father had moved them from Kansas after their mother died, and she had learned to read men quickly. The town was small but growing, with the railroad bringing in prospectors, gamblers, and men running from something they left behind. But Harrison's eyes were steady and honest, and his offer sounded genuine. I will speak to my father tonight, she said finally. If he agrees, I can start tomorrow. Tomorrow would be perfect. Harrison smiled, and the expression transformed his weather-worn face into something handsome and open. I will come by at sunrise if that is not too early. I am always awake at sunrise, Katherine replied. The horses need feeding. They walked together back to the livery stable, where Katherine's father stood examining a gelding's hoof. Samuel Sullivan was a large man with a back stooped from years of work, his beard more gray than brown now, his hands scarred from a lifetime of handling horses. "Papa," Katherine called, and her father looked up, his eyes moving from his daughter to the stranger beside her with natural caution. Harrison introduced himself properly, explaining his proposal with the same straightforward honesty he had shown Katherine. Samuel listened, his expression thoughtful, asking questions about the ranch's location, the living arrangements, and the exact nature of the work. When Harrison mentioned his mother's presence and his willingness to provide transportation both ways, Samuel's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Katherine has a gift," Samuel said finally, his voice carrying the accent of his Irish father. "Her mother had it too, but $2 a day is generous wages, Mr. Brennan. Makes me wonder why you are willing to pay so much." "Because I have 3 injured men, a dozen unusable horses, and a deadline to fulfill a contract with the Army fort in Trinidad," Harrison replied without hesitation. "The fort needs trained cavalry horses by October, or they will buy from another rancher. That contract is worth more than I can afford to lose. If your daughter can gentle these horses without anyone else getting hurt, $2 a day is a bargain." Samuel looked at Katherine, and she saw the question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, and her father sighed, the sound of a man who knew his daughter was grown despite wanting to keep her safe. "She can work for you," Samuel said, "but any hint of improper treatment and she comes home." "Understood, completely," Harrison agreed. "You have my word as a gentleman and a rancher." They shook hands, and the deal was made. Harrison promised to return at sunrise, tipped his hat to Katherine and her father, and strode out of the livery with the confident gait of a man used to long days in the saddle. Katherine watched him go, feeling something flutter in her chest that she did not quite understand. "Be careful, daughter," Samuel said quietly. "He seems honest, but you are 20 years old and beautiful like your mother. Men notice such things." "I will be careful, Papa," Katherine promised, though she could not help wondering if being careful was entirely what she wanted. That night, Katherine lay awake in the small room she shared with Mary, listening to her sister's steady breathing. Through the thin walls, she could hear the sounds of Lavetta settling into darkness. A dog barking, someone laughing outside the saloon 3 streets over, the whistle of the wind coming down from the Spanish peaks. She thought about the mustang's eyes, the way fear had transformed into trust as she sang. She thought about Harrison Brennan's face, the honest way he had made his offer, the slight smile that had crossed his features when she agreed to come. Sleep came late, and when it did, Katherine dreamed of singing to wild horses while a man with sky-colored eyes listened. Dawn arrived with fingers of pink and gold stretching across the mountains, and Katherine was already dressed when she heard the wagon pull up outside the livery. She had chosen her most practical dress, a sturdy brown cotton that would not show dirt, and had braided her hair tightly to keep it out of her face. A bonnet hung by its ribbons from her hand, and she carried a small basket her sister had helped pack with bread and cheese for midday. Harrison sat in the driver's seat of a well-maintained wagon, the horses in the traces standing quietly despite the early hour. He jumped down when he saw Katherine emerge from the livery, and she noticed he had cleaned up since yesterday, his shirt fresh, his face recently shaved. "Miss Sullivan," he greeted, taking her basket and helping her up into the wagon seat. "I appreciate your punctuality. My father always says that time is the one thing you cannot buy back once it is spent," Katherine replied, settling her skirts around her. "Is the ranch far?" "About 45 minutes northeast," Harrison said, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. "Near the Sangre de Cristo Creek. Good grazing land, spring water year-round. My father started the ranch 20 years ago when this was still wild country." As they drove through the awakening town and out onto the open range, Harrison told her about the ranch. He had grown up there, learning to ride before he could properly walk, helping his father build the operation from a dozen head of cattle to nearly 500. His father had died 2 years ago, kicked by a stallion he had been trying to break, and Harrison had taken over the ranch at 24. His mother, Helen, had stayed on, keeping the house and managing the books with the sharp mind that had helped build the ranch in the first place. "She will like you," Harrison said as the ranch buildings came into view in the distance. "She has been after me to hire help that is not just rough cowboys who eat like locusts and track mud everywhere." Katherine smiled despite her nerves. The ranch was larger than she had expected, with a substantial 2-story house painted white, a massive barn, several corrals and smaller outbuildings scattered across the property. Cattle dotted the grassland in the distance, and she could see several men already at work near the barn. Helen Brennan proved to be a woman in her early 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and gray-streaked brown hair pulled into a practical bun. She greeted Katherine warmly, her handshake firm and her smile genuine. "Harrison has told me about your gift with horses," Helen said, leading Katherine into the cool interior of the ranch house. "I am eager to see it for myself. We have tried everything with those mustangs and they simply will not settle. My husband would have sold them off immediately, but Harrison thinks every horse deserves a chance." "He is right," Katherine said, accepting the cup of coffee Helen poured for her. Most horses only act out of fear or confusion. They do not understand what we want from them, and they think they are fighting for their lives. Then let us hope you can help them understand, Helen replied. Finish your coffee and Harrison will take you to the corral. The problem horses were kept in a large corral separated from the rest of the ranch, and Katherine could hear their distressed whinnying before she saw them. There were 12 in total, all young mustangs with wild eyes and heaving flanks. They circled the enclosure in an anxious mass, feeding off each other's fear. Harrison stood beside the fence, his expression troubled. We have been keeping them together because separating them made things worse, but I am starting to think we might need to work with them individually. Katherine watched the horses carefully, noting the way they moved, the hierarchy already establishing itself in the herd. One mare, a buckskin with a white blaze, seemed to be the informal leader. Where she went, the others followed. Where she startled, they spooked. That one, Katherine said, pointing to the buckskin mare. She is the key. If I can calm her, the others will follow. She is also the most aggressive, Harrison warned. She charged my foreman yesterday when he tried to enter the corral. Nearly trampled him before he could get back over the fence. Then I will not go in at first, Katherine decided. I will sing from out here, and we will see if she will listen. Harrison looked doubtful but nodded. If this does not work, I want you to promise you will not put yourself in danger. No job is worth getting hurt over. I promise to be careful, Katherine said, which was not quite the same thing, but Harrison seemed to accept it. She positioned herself at the fence, finding a spot where she could see most of the corral, and began to sing. She chose the same lullaby she had sung to the mustang at the livery, the ancient words flowing from her as naturally as breathing. The melody carried across the corral, and one by one, the horses' ears swiveled toward her. The buckskin mare was the last to respond, still circling, still tense. But as Katherine continued singing, not stopping even when her throat grew dry, the mare slowed her pace. Her head lowered slightly. Her breathing became less frantic. Katherine sang for nearly an hour, cycling through every lullaby and gentle song she knew. The sun climbed higher, warming her back through her dress. Sweat trickled down her temples, but she did not stop. She watched the horses settle, watched the fear slowly drain from their eyes, replaced by curiosity and exhaustion. By the time she finished, her voice was hoarse, but all 12 horses stood relatively calm in the corral. The buckskin mare had approached the fence, stopping about 10 feet away, watching Katherine with intelligent eyes. That was incredible, Harrison breathed. He had been standing slightly behind her the whole time, silent and still. I have never seen anything like it. They are listening now, Katherine said, her voice rough. Tomorrow I can try going in with them, but today was about letting them hear something gentle in this place. They have only known violence and force here. Now they know there is something different. You need water, Harrison said immediately, and rest. Come back to the house. In the cool dimness of the ranch house kitchen, Katherine drank glass after glass of cool well water while Helen clucked over her like a worried hen. Harrison sat across the table, his eyes never leaving Katherine's face, an expression of wonder still lingering in his features. You must think I am mad, Katherine said finally, setting down her glass. Standing there singing to wild horses like they are children needing a bedtime story. I think you are extraordinary, Harrison replied, and the sincerity in his voice made Katherine's cheeks warm. I think you understand something about animals that most people never learn, and I think if anyone can gentle those horses, it is you. Over the following days, Katherine fell into a routine. Harrison would collect her at sunrise, and they would make the drive to the ranch together. Those morning conversations became something Katherine looked forward to, The way Harrison spoke about the land and the animals, his dreams for expanding the ranch, his memories of his father. She learned that he was 27, that he had courted a girl from Trinidad briefly, but realized they wanted different futures, that he believed in treating his workers fairly and his animals with respect. In turn, Katherine told him about Kansas, about her mother's death, about helping her father rebuild their lives in Colorado Territory. She spoke of her sister Mary, who was 16 and dreamed of becoming a schoolteacher. She confessed her fear that she would end up alone, unmarried, because no man in La Veta seemed to understand her way with horses or her need for something more than keeping house and bearing children. "The right man would never ask you to give up your gifts," Harrison said one morning as they watched the sunrise paint the mountains gold. "The right man would want you exactly as you are." The way he looked at her when he said it made Katherine's heart race. With the horses, progress came slowly but steadily. Katherine spent hours in the corral, always singing, always patient. She worked with the buckskin mare first, as planned, and the mare proved intelligent and willing once her fear subsided. Katherine named her Aspen, for the way her coat gleamed like white gold tree bark in the sun. Within a week, Aspen would eat from Katherine's hand. Within 2 weeks, she would allow Katherine to touch her neck and shoulders while singing. By the 3rd week, Katherine had fashioned a simple rope halter, and Aspen accepted it without protest, following Katherine around the corral like a devoted dog. The other horses watched and learned. What Aspen accepted, they would try. What made Aspen calm, they sought for themselves. Katherine worked with them individually, learning each horse's personality, giving them names, singing different songs to match their temperaments. Harrison watched whenever his ranch duties allowed, and Katherine grew accustomed to his presence, even found she performed better with him there. His quiet encouragement and obvious admiration gave her confidence she had not known she possessed. One afternoon, as Katherine successfully placed a saddle blanket on Aspen's back for the first time, Harrison approached the fence with an expression of deep satisfaction. "The Army contract is going to work," he said. "Thanks to you, we will have these horses ready in time. You have saved this ranch, Katherine." "I only sang to them," Katherine protested, exiting the corral and latching the gate behind her. "You are the one who had faith it would work." "Faith based on witnessing a miracle," Harrison replied. He reached out almost unconsciously and tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her braid behind her ear. The gesture was so gentle, so intimate that Katherine froze. "I am sorry," Harrison said immediately, pulling his hand back. "That was inappropriate." "No," Katherine said quickly, catching his hand before he could fully withdraw it. "It was not." They stood there in the afternoon sun, hands clasped, eyes locked. Katherine could feel her pulse hammering in her throat, could see the same nervous energy reflected in Harrison's face. Around them, the ranch continued its daily rhythm, but in that moment, they existed in a bubble of their own making. "Katherine," Harrison began, his voice rough with emotion. "These past few weeks, getting to know you, watching you work, talking with you every morning on the drive out here, I find myself thinking about you constantly. When I am checking the cattle, I am wondering what you are doing. When I am managing the books, I am remembering something you said that made me laugh. I have never felt this way about anyone, and I know it is too soon to speak of such things, but I cannot keep silent anymore." "Then do not," Katherine whispered, taking a step closer. "Do not keep silent." "I am falling in love with you," Harrison said, the words tumbling out as if they had been held back too long. "I love your kindness and your strength. I love the way you see the best in creatures everyone else has given up on. I love your voice when you sing, And I love the way you look at the world like it is full of possibilities instead of limitations. I know you could have any man you wanted, and I am just a rancher with dirt under his fingernails and more responsibilities than money, but I would be honored if you would allow me to court you properly." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Harrison Brennan, I have been waiting for you to say something for 2 weeks now. I thought perhaps you saw me only as an employee, someone useful with the horses, but nothing more. I have been half in love with you since that first day when you climbed into the corral and asked me to sing." Harrison's face broke into a smile so wide and genuine it transformed him. "You have, I have," Katherine confirmed, laughing through her tears. "And yes, you may court me. I would like nothing more." Harrison pulled her into his arms then, a proper embrace that made Catherine's heart soar. She pressed her face against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, leather and hay and clean sweat. His hand came up to cradle the back of her head, and for a long moment they simply held each other while the horses whinnied softly in the background, and the mountains stood witness to their declaration. When they finally pulled apart, both grinning like fools, Helen appeared on the porch of the ranch house, waving them in for the midday meal. If she noticed anything different between them, she gave no indication, but Katherine caught a small, knowing smile on the older woman's face as they approached. That evening, as Harrison drove Katherine back to La Veta, they talked about the future with a new openness. Harrison shared his plans for the ranch, his hope to eventually breed horses specifically for temperament and intelligence, rather than just size and strength. Katherine spoke of her dream to write down all the songs her mother had taught her, to preserve them for future generations. They discussed books they had read, places they wanted to see someday, what kind of home they might want to build. "I should speak to your father," Harrison said as they neared the town. "Ask his permission to court you formally." "He will say yes," Katherine assured him. "He trusts you, and he wants me to be happy." Samuel Sullivan did indeed give his permission, though not without a stern conversation with Harrison about expectations and honor. Harrison bore it all with grace and patience, assuring Catherine's father that his intentions were entirely honorable, that he hoped someday to ask for Catherine's hand in marriage if she would have him. "You are speaking of marriage already?" Samuel asked, his eyebrows raised. "I am speaking of my hopes for the future," Harrison clarified. "I will not rush Katherine into anything, but I want you to know that I am serious about your daughter, Mr. Sullivan. This is not a passing fancy or a temporary amusement." Samuel studied the younger man for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Catherine's mother, God rest her soul, she would have liked you. You have an honest face and a good heart, but you hurt my daughter, and rancher or no, you will answer to me." "I would expect nothing less, sir," Harrison replied. Word of the courtship spread through La Veta quickly, as news always did in small towns. Katherine found herself on the receiving end of curious looks and questions from neighbors and customers at the livery. Some were genuinely happy for her, congratulating her on catching the attention of one of the area's most eligible bachelors. Others were less kind, suggesting that Katherine had used her feminine wiles to trap a wealthy rancher, that no man would be truly interested in a woman who spent her days singing to horses instead of learning proper domestic skills. Katherine ignored the gossip as best she could, focusing instead on her work and her growing relationship with Harrison. They attended church together on Sundays, sitting with both the Sullivan and Brennan families. They went on proper chaperoned walks through town, with Mary or Helen trailing behind at a discreet distance. Harrison brought Katherine flowers he picked from the mountain meadows, and Katherine baked him bread using her mother's old recipes. The horses continued to gentle, one by one. By the beginning of September, all 12 mustangs accepted halters and would follow Katherine on a lead rope. She had begun introducing them to saddle blankets and the weight of empty saddles. Harrison's ranch hands, initially skeptical of the singing woman and her unconventional methods, became believers as they watched horses they had considered dangerous transform into willing, cooperative animals. "You should charge more than $2 a day," Helen told Katherine one afternoon as they sat on the porch snapping green beans for dinner. "You have a valuable skill, and you should be compensated accordingly." "I am happy with our arrangement," Katherine replied, though the money had indeed been helpful. She had been able to buy Mary the shoes she needed, and she had started a small savings of her own, something she had never had before. "Harrison worries that he is taking advantage of your goodness," Helen continued, her hands working automatically at the beans. "He says you could charge twice what he pays you, and ranchers from Denver to New Mexico would hire you." "Harrison is not taking advantage," Katherine said firmly. "He gave me an opportunity when no one else would. He believed in me before he had any proof I could do what I claimed. That loyalty means more than extra money." Helen smiled, reaching over to pat Katherine's hand. "You are good for my son. He has been alone too long, carrying too much weight on his shoulders. You make him laugh again, remind him there is more to life than work and worry." "He makes me feel like I matter," Katherine confessed. "Like my dreams are as important as anyone's. I have never had that before." "Then you are good for each other," Helen said with satisfaction. "That is how it should be." As September progressed and the aspens on the mountain slopes turned gold, Katherine successfully placed riders on 8 of the 12 horses. The other 4 still needed more time, but they no longer panicked at human approach, and Katherine was confident they would be ready before October's end. Harrison had already sent word to the Army fort in Trinidad that he would fulfill his contract, and the relief in his face when he told Katherine was palpable. "You saved us," he said again, pulling her into a private embrace behind the barn where no one could see. "Without you, I would have had to sell off part of the herd to cover our debts. The ranch might not have survived another year." "We saved each other," Katherine replied, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You gave me purpose and confidence. You showed me I could be more than just my father's helper." Harrison tilted her chin up, his eyes searching her face. "Katherine Sullivan, I know we have only been courting for a few weeks, and by all rights, I should wait longer before speaking of this. But I am not a patient man when it comes to my future, and I cannot imagine that future without you in it. Would you consider marrying me?" Katherine's breath caught. She had known this was coming, had felt it in every touch and look they shared, but hearing the actual words still sent her heart racing. "I would need time to prepare," she said slowly, watching hope and fear war in Harrison's expression. "A proper wedding with my family there. And I would want to finish the work with the horses, see them fully trained and ready for the Army. I would not want to leave a job half done." "Of course," Harrison agreed quickly. "I would never ask you to leave work unfinished. And you can have whatever kind of wedding you want, whatever time you need to prepare. I just need to know if your answer is yes." "My answer is yes," Katherine said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "Yes, Harrison Brennan, I will marry you. I will be your wife and your partner, and we will build a life together." Harrison kissed her then, a proper kiss that made Katherine's toes curl in her boots and her head spin with happiness. It was not her first kiss. There had been a boy in Kansas when she was 17, but it was the first kiss that mattered, the first kiss that promised forever. They announced their engagement at dinner that evening, with Samuel and Mary invited to join the Brennan household for a celebration meal. Samuel looked at his daughter with eyes that held both happiness and sorrow, the joy of seeing her settled warring with the pain of letting her go. Mary squealed with delight and immediately began planning what she would wear to the wedding. Helen cried happy tears and welcomed Katherine into the family officially, promising to teach her everything she knew about running a large household. "When?" Samuel asked, his voice gruff with emotion. "When will you marry?" "November," Harrison suggested, looking to Katherine for confirmation. "After the horses are delivered to the fort, after the harvest is complete. It will give everyone time to prepare, and the weather should still be decent for travel if you want to invite relatives." "November is perfect," Katherine agreed. "We can have the ceremony at the church in Lavetta and the celebration here at the ranch if that is acceptable." "More than acceptable," Helen said firmly. "This house was meant for family gatherings and celebrations. We will make it beautiful." The following weeks passed in a blur of continued horse training and wedding preparations. Katherine worked with the mustangs every day, pushing them gently but steadily toward full training. She sang to them constantly, different songs for different moods and lessons. The horses responded beautifully, their trust in her absolute, their progress steady. In the evenings, after Harrison brought her home, Katherine and Mary would sit together working on her wedding dress. Neither of them was an expert seamstress, but they managed to create something lovely from cream-colored fabric Katherine had bought at the general store. They embroidered small flowers along the collar and cuffs, painstaking work by lamplight that left Katherine's eyes aching but her heart full. Harrison courted her properly throughout it all, never presuming on their engagement, always treating her with respect and tenderness. They stole moments alone when they could, quick kisses behind the barn or long conversations while sitting on the corral fence watching the sunset. He told her about his childhood, about learning to rope cattle from his father, about the hard years when drought had almost destroyed the ranch. She shared memories of her mother, stories of Kansas, dreams for the future. "I want children," Harrison said one evening as they walked the perimeter of the ranch, Helen following at a discreet distance. "At least 3 or 4 if we are blessed. I want them to grow up knowing this land, learning to respect animals and nature, growing strong and confident like their mother." "I want that too," Katherine replied, imagining a future filled with small voices and laughter. "I want to teach them the songs my mother taught me. I want them to understand that gentleness is not weakness, that there are many ways to be strong." "They will be lucky to have you as their mother," Harrison said, squeezing her hand, "just as I am lucky to have you as my wife-to-be." By mid-October, all 12 horses were fully trained and ready for delivery. The Army sent representatives to inspect the animals, and they were impressed by the mustangs' calm temperaments and solid training. Harrison received payment for the contract, enough to secure the ranch's finances for another year and begin planning expansions. "None of this would have happened without you," Harrison told Katherine as they watched the Army men lead the horses away toward Trinidad. "You gave me hope when I was ready to give up, and you delivered results beyond what I imagined possible." "The horses did the work," Katherine said modestly. "I just helped them understand what was being asked of them." "You did far more than that," Harrison insisted. "And starting tomorrow, I want you to think about what comes next. I know you enjoyed working with the horses, and I do not want that to end just because we are getting married. What if we made this a permanent part of the ranch? We could advertise your services, bring in problem horses from all over Colorado territory. You could teach others your methods, build something lasting." Katherine stared at him, amazed. "You would want that. You would not expect me to simply keep house and tend children." "I would expect you to be yourself," Harrison replied. To use your gifts and talents however makes you happiest. Yes, I hope we will have children, and yes, they will need their mother. But I am marrying, he corrected with a smile. A remarkable woman, and I would never try to make you into something ordinary. Katherine threw her arms around his neck, overcome with emotion. I love you so much, she whispered fiercely. I did not know a man like you existed. I love you too, Harrison replied, holding her tight. And I plan to spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of you. The wedding took place on a clear, cold Saturday in early November. The small church in Lavetta was packed with friends and neighbors, ranchers and townspeople who had known the Sullivan and Brennan families for years. Katherine wore her cream-colored dress with pride, her hair arranged by Mary into an elegant twist, decorated with small dried flowers. She carried a bouquet of late-season wildflowers that Harrison had ridden into the mountains to collect the day before. Samuel walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, placing her hand in Harrison's with a whispered blessing. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, traditional vows spoken with voices that shook with emotion. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed Katherine with such tender joy that several women in the congregation wiped their eyes. The celebration at the ranch was boisterous and warm, with music provided by a fiddler from town and food contributed by nearly every family in attendance. They danced under strings of lanterns Helen had hung from the porch and trees, swirling through reels and waltzes until Katherine's feet ached and her face hurt from smiling. As the evening grew late and guests began to depart, Harrison pulled Katherine aside, leading her away from the noise and light to a quiet spot near the horse corrals. The mustangs they had trained were long gone, but other horses remained, dozing peacefully in the cool night air. "Sing for me," Harrison requested softly, his arms around her waist, her back against his chest. "Like you did for the horses, like you do when you think no one is listening." "I always knew you were listening," Katherine admitted, but she began to sing anyway. She chose one of her mother's oldest lullabies, the melody floating out into the night, carried away by the wind toward the dark shapes of the mountains. Harrison held her close as she sang, his chin resting on top of her head, his heart beating steady against her back. When the song ended, he turned her in his arms to face him. "Will you sing for me always?" he asked, his voice serious despite the celebration continuing behind them. "Not just tonight, but every night we have together. When things are hard and when they are easy, when we are young and when we are old. Will you share that part of yourself with me always?" "Always," Katherine promised, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I will sing for you, for our children, for the horses we will gentle together. I will sing when I am happy and when I am sad, and you will always know what is in my heart by the songs I choose." "Then I am the luckiest man alive," Harrison said, and kissed his wife under the vast Colorado sky, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of horses and the distant celebration of their new beginning. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Katherine moved her few possessions into the ranch house, taking over the bedroom Harrison had prepared for them. Helen tactfully gave the newlyweds space while still being present to help Katherine learn the rhythms of managing a large household. The winter was mild by Colorado standards, with snow that blanketed the ranch in white but never became so deep it stopped work entirely. Katherine discovered she enjoyed the domestic tasks she had always assumed would bore her. Cooking with Helen taught her recipes and techniques she had never learned from her mother. Managing the household accounts showed her she had a head for numbers, and through it all, she continued working with the horses. Word of her success with the Army mustangs had spread, and by January, Ranchers from as far as Denver were writing to inquire about her services. Harrison helped her compose professional responses, setting reasonable rates and establishing a schedule that would not overwhelm her. By February, they had 3 problem horses boarding at the ranch, each one considered difficult or dangerous by their owners, each one responding to Katherine's patient singing and gentle methods. "You are becoming famous," Harrison teased one evening as another letter arrived requesting her services. "Soon you will be too important to have time for a simple rancher like me." "Never," Katherine replied, kissing him soundly. "You are the one who made this possible. You believed in me before anyone else did." In March, Katherine realized she was pregnant. The morning sickness that had plagued her for 2 weeks suddenly made sense, as did her unusual fatigue and emotional responses to small things. She told Harrison one evening as they prepared for bed, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. "Truly," he asked, wonder filling his voice, "we are going to have a baby. In October, if my calculations are correct," Katherine confirmed. "Are you happy?" Harrison pulled her into his arms, his embrace fierce and protective. "Happy does not begin to cover what I feel. Amazed, terrified, grateful, overwhelmed with joy. You are giving me everything I ever wanted, Katherine. A partner, a purpose, and now a child. How did I get so fortunate?" "We got fortunate together," Katherine corrected, but she was crying happy tears that soaked into his shirt. They told their families the following Sunday after church. Samuel embraced his daughter with gentle care, as if she might break, whispering that her mother would have been so proud. Mary shrieked with delight at becoming an aunt, and immediately began planning what she would teach the baby. Helen cried and laughed simultaneously, talking about preparing the nursery and finding the cradle she had used for Harrison. Katherine continued working with horses through her pregnancy, adjusting her methods as her body changed. She no longer entered corrals with the most dangerous animals, but she could still sing from outside the fence, still gentle the frightened ones with her voice and patience. The pregnant rancher's wife who sang to horses became something of a legend in the area, and Katherine found herself amused by the reputation. "They act like what I do is magic," she told Harrison one warm summer evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "But it is just understanding and compassion. Anyone could do it if they tried." "Not anyone," Harrison disagreed, his hand resting on her swollen belly, feeling their child kick and move. "You have a gift, Katherine. Not everyone has your patience or your insight. And not everyone has a voice like yours that makes both horses and humans want to listen." Their son was born on a crisp October morning, 3 weeks earlier than expected but healthy and strong. They named him James, after Harrison's father, and Michael, after Katherine's grandfather. The baby had Harrison's eyes and Katherine's dark blonde hair, and his cries were surprisingly loud for such a small creature. Katherine recovered quickly from the birth, and within weeks, she was back to working with horses, though now she wore James in a sling against her chest while she sang. The baby seemed to enjoy the music, often falling asleep to the sound of his mother's lullabies while horses watched with calm, curious eyes. "He is already learning your ways," Harrison observed, watching his wife and son with tender amusement. "He will grow up thinking it is perfectly normal to sing to animals and expect them to understand." "Because it is normal," Katherine replied, swaying gently to soothe James. "At least, it should be. The world would be a kinder place if more people tried to understand what frightens others instead of just using force to get what they want." As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Harrison expanded their cattle operation and began breeding horses specifically for temperament, using the methods Katherine had pioneered. They hired additional ranch hands to manage the increased work, and Helen finally got the larger kitchen she had always wanted. Catherine's reputation continued to grow. She trained several ranch hands in her methods, though none quite had her natural gift. Still, spreading the knowledge of gentle horse training felt important, like honoring her mother's legacy. She wrote down all the songs she remembered, adding notes about which melodies worked best for different situations, creating a manual she hoped to publish someday. Mary came to live with them the year James turned 2, taking a position as the new schoolteacher in Lavetta, but spending weekends at the ranch. She adored her nephew and proved invaluable in helping with childcare when Katherine was working. Samuel visited frequently, his body aging but his spirit still strong, delighted to see his daughter thriving in her chosen life. When James was 3, Katherine became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy progressed smoothly despite her continued work. She delivered a daughter in June, a summer baby with bright eyes and a loud, demanding cry. They named her Rose Helen, honoring both the flower Katherine loved and Harrison's mother. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm over the following years. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who followed his father everywhere, learning ranch work with patient determination. Rose proved to be spirited and fearless, more likely to be found in the horse corrals than the house, singing to the animals in an off-key but enthusiastic voice that made everyone smile. Katherine taught both children the lullabies her mother had taught her, the ancient melodies that seemed to transcend language and species. James had a decent voice, and his mother's patience with animals. Rose sang with more passion than skill, but showed a natural understanding of horse behavior that reminded Harrison of Katherine when they first met. "We are raising horse whisperers," Harrison joked one evening as they watched their children, now 7 and 4, sitting in the corral with a mare and her new foal. James sang softly while Rose petted the foal with gentle hands, both children completely at ease with animals that would have terrified most adults. "We are raising good humans," Katherine corrected, "who happen to understand that all creatures deserve kindness and respect." Samuel Sullivan passed away peacefully in his sleep. The winter Rose turned 5. The whole family mourned the loss of the kind man who had supported Katherine's unconventional path and welcomed Harrison into their family. They buried him in the cemetery outside Lavetta, next to the plot where Katherine's mother rested, and Katherine sang at his funeral the lullabies he had loved to hear her practice. Helen began to slow down as she entered her 60s, spending more time resting and less time managing the household. Katherine took over most of the domestic responsibilities gladly, having learned well from her mother-in-law. The two women had become genuine friends over the years, sharing confidences and laughter, supporting each other through the challenges of ranch life. When Rose was 7 and James was 10, Katherine became pregnant for the 3rd time. She was 32 now, more confident in her body and abilities than she had been with the previous pregnancies. This time she delivered twin boys, much to everyone's surprise and delight. They named them Daniel Robert and Thomas William, and the chaos of managing 4 children under the age of 10 kept the entire household busy. "You wanted 3 or 4 children," Katherine reminded Harrison one particularly hectic evening when both twins were crying. James had tracked mud throughout the house, and Rose had somehow managed to get a chicken into the kitchen. "I believe we have achieved your goal." Harrison, holding a crying twin in each arm, laughed despite the chaos. "I should have been more specific about the timing. Perhaps spacing them out over 20 years instead of 10 would have been wiser." But he was happy, genuinely, deeply happy. The ranch was successful beyond his early dreams. Katherine's horse training business brought in steady additional income and had put the Brennan name on the map throughout Colorado and beyond. They had 4 healthy children, a comfortable home, and a love that had only deepened with time and shared challenges. Katherine continued singing to horses and teaching others her methods well into her 40s. She finally published her manual on gentle horse training when the twins were 5, and it sold surprisingly well, distributed through ranch supply stores and catalogs across the West. Letters came from as far as California and Montana, from ranchers thanking her for showing them a better way to work with their animals. James grew into a fine young man who attended the Agricultural College in Fort Collins, studying animal husbandry with plans to return to the ranch and implement new breeding programs. Rose shocked everyone by announcing at 15 that she wanted to become a veterinarian, one of the first women to pursue such an ambition, and both Katherine and Harrison supported her dream wholeheartedly. The twins proved to be natural horsemen, working with their father from young ages, learning every aspect of ranch management. They were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences, working together with the wordless communication that only twins seemed to share. Helen passed away peacefully at 71, surrounded by her family, holding Harrison's hand while Katherine sang her favorite lullaby. They mourned her but celebrated her life, a woman who had helped build a ranch from nothing and raised a son who knew how to honor both strength and gentleness. Mary married a kind merchant from La Veta when she was 30, later than most, but to a man who truly valued her intelligence and independence. She remained the town's schoolteacher for 20 more years, influencing generations of children with her patient teaching and high expectations. As Katherine entered her 50s, she began to slow down, leaving the day-to-day horse training to younger hands she had trained, though she still sang to the animals whenever she visited the corrals. Her hair had turned mostly silver, and her hands showed the wear of decades of hard work, but her voice remained clear and true, the lullabies as powerful as ever. Harrison aged alongside her, his body weathered by years of ranch work, his face lined by sun and worry and laughter. But when he looked at Katherine, his eyes still held the same wonder and love they had shown that first day in the corral in La Veta, watching a young woman sing to a frightened mustang. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Harrison organized a celebration at the ranch. Their children came, James now married with 2 children of his own, Rose freshly graduated from veterinary school and starting her practice, the twins running the day-to-day ranch operations with confident skill. Mary and her husband attended, along with half the population of La Veta and surrounding ranches. As the evening festivities wound down and guests began to depart, Harrison led Katherine to the same spot near the horse corrals where he had asked her to sing for him on their wedding night 3 decades earlier. "You remember?" he asked, his arm around her waist, holding her close in the familiar way of long married couples. "Every moment," Katherine replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "You asked me to sing for you always. I said I would." "And you have," Harrison said softly. "Through good times and hard times, through babies being born and loved ones passing, through droughts and successful seasons, through every joy and every sorrow. You have sung for me, for our children, for hundreds of horses over the years. You have filled my life with music and meaning." "You gave me permission to be myself," Katherine replied, her voice thick with emotion. "You saw something in me that day when everyone else just saw a strange woman who talked to animals. You believed in me, supported me, loved me exactly as I am. That has been the greatest gift of my life." "Will you sing for me now?" Harrison asked, the same request he had made so many times over the decades. "One of the old songs, the ones your mother taught you," Katherine began to sing, her voice perhaps not as strong as it had been at 20 but richer with experience and emotion. The lullaby floated out across the ranch, over the corrals where horses dozed peacefully, over the house where their grandchildren slept, over the land they had built a life upon together. Harrison held his wife and listened, as he had listened for 30 years, as he would continue listening for whatever years remained to them. And in that moment, surrounded by the legacy they had built together, the children they had raised, the knowledge that they had lived well and loved deeply, both knew they had found something rare and precious. The story the old-timers in La Veta would tell for generations was not about a successful ranch or a famous horse trainer. It was about a woman who sang lullabies to calm frightened horses, about the cowboy who listened and asked her to sing for him always, and about the lifetime of love that grew from that simple, extraordinary beginning. As they walked back to the house together under a sky full of stars, Katherine began another song, and Harrison smiled, knowing he would never tire of hearing her voice, not in this life or any that might come after. They had built something beautiful together, not just in buildings and livestock and successful children, but in the way they had chosen to live each day with kindness, respect, and an understanding that gentleness was its own kind of strength. The ranch would continue for generations, passed down through their children and grandchildren, but the true legacy was intangible. It lived in the way horses were trained with patience instead of force. It echoed in the lullabies sung by Katherine's descendants to calm frightened animals. It persisted in the story of two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and built a life that honored both their dreams. Years later, when they were both in their 70s, Katherine and Harrison would sit together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the mountains they had loved their entire adult lives. Sometimes she would sing, sometimes they would simply sit in comfortable silence, but always, Harrison would listen as if her voice was the most beautiful sound in the world, and perhaps it was, at least to him, because it was the sound of home and love and a promise kept across decades. It was the sound of a life well lived and a partnership that had weathered every storm. It was the sound of a woman who had taught him that there was more than one way to be strong, and that sometimes the gentlest approach was also the most powerful. When Katherine finally grew too frail to visit the corrals regularly, the horses would call to her when she appeared on the porch, recognizing the woman who had treated them with such consistent kindness. And even in her final years, her voice remained true enough to quiet a nervous horse or soothe a frightened foal, the gift her mother had given her persisting until the very end. Harrison never stopped asking her to sing, and Katherine never refused. It was their ritual, their connection, the thread that had woven through their entire life together. And when they both eventually passed, within months of each other as long married couples sometimes do, their children and grandchildren remembered them not just as successful ranchers or innovative horse trainers, but as two people who had loved each other completely and built something beautiful together. The lullabies continued, passed down through generations of the Brennan family. Rose taught them to the young veterinarians she trained. James used them with the breeding program he developed. The twins sang them to their own children, who sang them to theirs. And in the horse corrals of the ranch that still bore the Brennan name a century later, you could sometimes hear those ancient melodies floating on the wind, a legacy of love and gentleness that refused to fade. It was a story about horses and singing, yes. But more than that, it was a story about seeing the extraordinary in another person and having the courage to build a life around that vision. It was about a woman who calmed frightened horses with lullabies and a cowboy who listened with his whole heart and asked her to sing for him always. And in the end, that was enough to create a legacy that outlasted them both, a testament to the power of gentleness, patience, and enduring love.